Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for stroke side to hold and bow side to get in. Broken Oars, episode 9. Actually, our 10th episode, but we're calling it episode 9. And it's another interview. It's an interview with an incredibly interesting person. But there's something a little bit odd about this interview. Aaron, do you want to tell us what that is?
Yes, there's several things odd about this interview, Lewin. And the first is that you've just introduced this as though it's an outing and we are pushing off from the landing stage. You are now thematically tying together our closing point of bow side holding, stroke sides, heads under. I think that is a beautiful and wondrous and poetic thing to do.
I'm trying to get a theme going. So it's like it's more of the catchphrases. It's like, right, let's start the episode with like bow side holding, stroke side in, and then, at some point we're going to mention the fact that we are not leaving any James Cracknells behind.
Well, yes, but the thing is about our catchphrases, as our listeners probably don't know, is that Steve Redgrave is now suing us for constantly referring to Sydney as Redgrave's last stand. James Cracknell is suing us for saying that there were no James Cracknells harmed in the making of these episodes and no James Cracknells left behind. And Matthew Pinson is suing us because we've pointed out that God is one of his direct descendants rather than the other way around.
Matthew Pinson is suing us because I suggested that James Cracknell should call his pug Pinson.
And James Cracknell replied, I would, but he's not fast enough.
That's a slightly die-happy moment that James Cracknell liked one of my jokes.
Yes.
When you think about it, if James Cracknell trains Pinsent the pug well, this will be the first time that a Pinsent has ever followed a Cracknell's instruction. James Cracknell can boss around Pinsent all the time. He can say, Pinsent, fetch, and Pinsent will go and fetch.
There is that. The other thing is also that if James Cracknell trains his dog and calls it Pinsent and trains it well, it'll be the first time that a Cracknell and a Pinsent have ever worked in tandem in a pair together. Yeah, just call the lawyers now. We're going down. It's not even going to be lawfare. It'll just be a massacre. Lewin is alluding to the fact that when he interviewed Rory Copus, and it is a wonderful interview, yours truly was absent, and I had some issues with my kidneys on the day that we were supposed to be interviewing Rory. I'm a man who lacks kidney, is Lewin's joke. In the Regency period in England, that would mean a very, very different thing. He would be casting aspersions on my courage, and I would be forced to challenge him to a duel, which would be very unfortunate because I really like his wife and I think his children are adorable, and we'd end up shooting each other with dueling pistols. About 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 kidney disease. Now, at the time, I was rowing in Agecroft's Henley boats. I was finishing a PhD or researching a PhD. I was lecturing full-time at the universities in Manchester, and I was leading a very active and vivid social life around Manchester, and my kidneys did not seem to stop me doing any of this. And all of a sudden this summer I've been hit by all of the things that probably should have been happening over a period of time. So I've had broken feet and sprained ankles and cellulitis in the feet, and my kidneys decided to stop working for a little bit. Not badly stop working, but enough to make me quite poorly and have to go to hospital. One of the points that Lewin made before we started recording was that, have you ever considered, Aaron, that the reason the interview was so good was because you weren't in it, which I thought was just savage, absolutely savage.
Did I say that out loud? I'm sure I didn't say. I'm sure I just thought that. It's just like,
I've been in a boat with you for a long time. I can read what you're thinking through. I can read what you're thinking through the set of your shoulders. You definitely thought it. Your shoulders told me so.
Fair enough. In my own defence, I thought no such thing. It was very much a chat between two profoundly southern individuals, and I think Aaron would have been that spice that really brought it out together. But it was a great interview with Rory Copus, who is a cox, a coach. He is also, and this is important, he is an occasional rower as well. He knows how to row. He doesn't just sit in the boat. And I think we should let him tell his story, but it's a very good story. He is a graduate of Abingdon and of Oxford-Brookes, and he has done really rather well steering boats at both. And he's also, I would say, probably one of the 3 most famous coxes in this country, thanks very much to his presence on YouTube. And we will leave the necessary links in the description of this episode. But let Rory explain himself in his own words. Please enjoy.
Okay. So welcome back to another one of the Broken Oars podcast rowing interviews. This time with the conqueror of Belmont Hill, Rory Copus, coach at Abingdon School, previously of Abingdon School and Oxford-Brookes University. One thing I should just point out at the moment, it's only going to be me doing this interview because my partner in pod, Dr. Aaron Jackson, is a little bit poorly at the moment. So he's going to be taking a back seat for this one and thankfully doing all our editing, so I sound vaguely human. So Rory, welcome to the podcast.
Good to be here.
Tell us just a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how long you've been doing this rowing thing, and your sort of history and locations in it.
Well, so I picked up rowing, I think back in 2004. I'd been very much into cross country and hockey at school, and my dad said to me, there's it's the last sort of taste today of doing rowing. Would you want to go along? And I wasn't that into it at the time because I was doing county hockey, and I thought that was sort of the direction I was going to go with my sport. And I felt bad. Because this is the last day. My dad would be disappointed if I didn't at least go along and try. And this was at the time where they just, I think it was in November or December, and they'd bring people along and would sit down on some ergos in the rowing room and just teach them roughly the sequencing and just be like, just go and pull hard, whatever. And the short people, they'd be like, just yell some encouragement at them. And I really enjoyed that. And I got a kick out of it. And I was like, I could see myself doing this as a sport. So I picked it up that year. And I think I'm going on, my maths is right, 16 years, almost 17 years involved in the sport.
So you got in kind of that sort of 2000 to 2004 Olympiad after Sydney. Because to my shame, I have to admit that I'm worried now, sort of looking back on it, I never watched Sydney live. You know, I can almost like replay all the phases of the race in my head, but I didn't actually watch Redgrove's 5th gold medal live. And then it was after that, down the road, that I became a rower, which it's a bit of a strange one, but sort of the first one really screaming at the TV live was in Sydney. When you say you were doing this, was this at school or at a club?
So I sort of picked it up at I was introduced to it at school, at Abingdon, and I did sort of all the the PE sessions at school as rowing, but then I also joined Marlow Rowing Club to do some stuff at the weekends, because at the time they were only offering Monday to Friday rowing for 14, 15-year-olds at school. So I was part of the club scene at the weekends, and I was coxed quads at sort of J14, J15 level, and I worked my way up through the senior squad. So I started coxing the second 8 for a bit at Marlow Rowing Club, and then ended up coxing the first 8, which were my first 2 experiences at Henley. Actually, was representing Marlow Rowing Club. So we think I was coxing the second 8, which was a sort of seniors and juniors combo boat, and I think we were 7 seconds off qualifying, which was quite fun for the Thames Cup. And then the next year I coxed the first 8, and we got pre-qualified, made it to the Friday, and got knocked out by Leander, which was when they were still doing their sort of over 19s Thames Cup club project. But there was a mixture of school and club stuff is what sort of started me off, I guess.
I mean, I probably don't know enough about Abingdon, but it is part boarding. So were you sort of like skipping out and, so it's like knocking off Saturday morning lessons to go and head down to Marlow, or?
No. It is part boarding. I think about a third of the boys do board there at the moment. But I was a day boy, and I was commuting from the Marlow area to school every day. So that was like my local club for when I wasn't at school, obviously.
From Abingdon onto Oxford-Brookes. Presumably that's actually a little bit before Oxford-Brookes became this like mighty, all-conquering juggernaut that is feared by anything other than the top tier of international crews. So were you kind of like part of that kind of that kind of like wave upwards?
I reckon, honestly, so I was involved in the sort of the 2-3 years that really spearheaded and kicked everything off. Because Oxford-Brookes have been a really good university program. It won the Temple in 2006. They won the Prince Albert Cox Fours event in 2009, and then it was sort of like a period of Newcastle's dominance at that time, sort of like 2010, 11, 12. And in 2012, so I arrived in September of 2010, leading into the 2011 season. Yeah. And the 2012 year, we had quite a good year because we had a lot of guys who had come from sort of, not massive rowing backgrounds, but really sort of improved and really sort of came on a lot with their rowing when they were at Brookes. And we did a lot with quite a small group of people in 2012. And we ended up sort of racing quite competitively at Met and Marlow, and we lost 2012. We lost to University of Virginia on a Thursday, which was quite interesting. But then quite a lot of those. So 2012, we did a lot with quite a small squad, and that sort of drew the attention of a few juniors who were coming through the Coop and Junior World system. So we find ourselves in 2013 with a much bigger squad, a lot of people who already have, prior rowing experience, because at the time, Brookes was sort of comprising its squad, sort of half of experienced people or people who had rowing backgrounds by the time they got to university, and half through the novice program. So a lot of people who learned to row legitimately at university level. And when we get to 2013, we find ourselves with almost 3/8 worth of people who have rowing experience before coming to university. And we come second at Bucks. We then go to Henley, and we essentially lost the final on the Friday. We lost to the eventual winners, Lager from the Netherlands, by half a length. And that was the closest that any other university got to them. So I like to say that we were the second fastest crew in the event that year. And what really kicked things off was the fact that all 8 of those guys from 2013 stayed on, still had at least a year of their degree left. We then get more people coming into the program, having seen what's gone on the year before and want to be a part of it. One of which was my own brother, Jamie. He joined Brookes at the beginning of the 2014 season, and a couple other boys who'd come out of junior level. And essentially we took what was a pretty strong 8 in 2013 and made it stronger. Okay. And that was, I think, very decisive in terms of, turning the momentum from Newcastle's 3-year really strong reign at university level in the UK to this new sort of tidal wave that we're still riding of Oxford-Brookes being the dominating force at university level. We won Bucks by a length. We set, at that time, the fastest university 2K of 5:40. Was it? It was either 5:40 or it was 5:39. And then we went to Henley and we won Henley, which was amazing. And then 2015, they almost did the same thing. They had a really successful university run through Bucks and Met and Marlow, and then they just got overturned by Nereus on the Friday. But then those guys came back the year later and did the 2016 win And then they did the 2017 ladies win, while we had a new Temple bunch winning the Temple, and then 2018 ladies again and Temple. And it's been like that ever since. And, you know, success breeds success. And more and more and more people want to be involved in that program when they leave school. And that is what's continuing to draw in top end talent and keeps the squad as competitive as it's ever been year on year.
I mean, it seems as though we, you know, in the way I had this in mind going through, it seems we've kind of jumped forward straight into Brookes. So let's just keep sort of going about that. I mean, if you're one of these 17, 18-year-olds doing your A-levels, you have that kind of like background in the sport. You've been rowing, you know, I don't know, maybe you're a 10 or a 14-term rower at your school. What should be going through your head if you're thinking about, I'm going to apply to Oxford-Brookes with the intention of being a rower there? What calculations should you be making?
So, especially in the last like 3 years, obviously, you know, I'm not, when I was a student there for 4 years, and then I became a coach for 2 years, so I'm not involved in their program anymore. Mm-hmm. But from what I can see from their website, they have now an erg cutoff, because obviously they're dealing with up to 100 men and women respectively in terms of the squads.
Yeah.
Like they're dealing with a lot of athletes, and obviously there is only so many ergos that they can sit people on, and so many seats that they can sit in a boat. So they have to find a way to sort of draw a line with the wealth of people who are applying every year. And they have a recruitment form on their website, which, you know, you go and you fill in your details, and they say specifically, if you're a man, you need to have at least this 2K score to apply. And if you're a woman, you need this score to apply, just because they have to find a way to draw the line somewhere. Because it is ridiculously competitive, and not just in terms of getting into Brookes, but then once you're in Brookes, the internal competition and everyone fighting for a seat in a really positive way, then pushes on everybody when you get onto the water, and you've got like, you know, the Brookes 5th 8 trying to beat the 4th 8 in training and things like that. So it's in terms of like juniors wanting to apply for Brookes, I would say, if you really want to take your rowing seriously and you really want to look for that absolute next step in terms of taking your rowing further and pushing your abilities on, then Brookes is a very good place to do that. I wouldn't say the only place in the country, because there are, you know, other fantastic university rowing programs, but Brookes in particular, because of the way that they're currently feeding people through student Temple Bucks squads into their like ladies squad, that sort of squad that sits just outside of the senior team, then the group of like performance pathway athletes who are trying to break into the senior squad. And now you've got, you know, guys like Rory Gibbs and Morgan Boulding currently in the squad. And then you've got other people sitting on the outskirts, you know, trying to break their way in. It is a very, very good program for that reason. So yeah, if you want to apply to Brookes, obviously you've got to be quite grounded in terms of how good an athlete you know you are right now, how good an athlete you think you could be in the future. Could you be competitive? And, you know, be very prepared for hard training and, you know, asking a lot of yourself in terms of your physicality and your mentality and the quality that you're rowing with every day.
That kind of level that Brookes is operating at, I was never a university rower, and to be honest, the days when I was actually capable of doing that training are actually quite a long way behind me. But I've certainly seen a few people like posting what they're doing at Brookes on Facebook. I'm a member of an online indoor rowing club, and there's another guy there from Brookes, and he was knocking out, you know, in a fairly relaxed fashion, 2 16Ks a day and weight. That's what he was posting. He was posting up his scores, and these 16Ks were going out at sort of 1:49. is that just the level you have to be at? Is that a bit much for the overwhelming majority of students who want to row? Is there another side to Brookes where it's kind of, you can row and you can row well, but you don't have to be on the full international training?
I don't think so. Certainly when I was an athlete there and as a coach, like the program is the program. It hasn't really changed a huge amount in terms of like the underlying base stuff that they do. So I think the performance pathway guys who are sort of no longer students and have won the ladies and they're looking for that next step thing, they do something slightly different because obviously they're trying to align their training load more with what the senior squad guys are doing. And also the fact that, you know, they're not students, so they're not having to operate by the student timetable, so they can essentially train in and around their work. But I guess that is the standard that you need to operate at now in terms of university rowing, and especially, you know, the top end guys who are wanting to win the ladies or, you know, go to the Windermere Cup and race against University of Washington and things like that. That is the standard. And, you know, that's certainly what programs like that in the States, like the Yales and the Washingtons and the Cals, that's what they're doing too. And that is the standard now. And it's pretty obscene when you think of it that way. It's like, the amount,
I mean, this was, I don't know if you know him from Twitter. I mean, he's a bit of a stalwart, but Tristan Mayglothing, we had a chat with him like this. It was an interview, and his focus is massively on athlete welfare. There is that kind of balance between athlete welfare and performance. And one of the things that we should probably have another chat with him, but I wanted to bring up was this idea that you don't set the price. That there's the price you have to pay to compete and be successful, and you don't have any control over it. You just essentially your opposition and the event is setting the training for you, because that's what you have to do if you're going to be successful. The idea you were saying there that I'm only partly aware of is that there are two sides to Brookes. There's the university side and there's the open club side. Is that right? Yeah.
So this was, I don't know if it's always been like this, but it was certainly like this when I was there. So, you know, you have the athletes who come under the banner of the student side of things, Oxford-Brookes University Boat Club, and there are the athletes who have either just graduated or are still using Brookes as their training base, or athletes that are like, okay, I want to train at Brookes as opposed to training at Leander or training at Molesey and things like that. And they use Brookes as their training center. So when you have events like Brit Champs in October or Head of the River and things like that, anyone and everyone who wants to compete for Brookes comes under the banner of Oxford-Brookes University Boat Club. But obviously, when they're racing in like Brookes second 8 is like an academic 8 because they're entirely full of students that are going for the academic pennant, then it has to be obviously students. And then when it comes to, you know, April, May time, they start splitting off into the respective squads of, okay, the students are going for, I don't know, 3 Temple boats and 2 PA4s. And the other half of the squad is going for the ladies or a visitors 4 or, But there is a wealth of people who are either students or non-students anymore, but they use Brookes as a training base. Because, historically, obviously, Brookes used to be just a university, but when you graduated from university, you went and represented your Leanders or your Moleseys. But it's become more of a thing in the past of the athletes deciding that they still want to represent Brookes on the big stage at national trials and so on, which is fantastic for, obviously, the university's exposure, but also shows the what's the word? I guess commitment to continuing and wanting to represent the club. And it's the same for.
It's genuinely impressive.
Yeah, because you got Matt Tarrant in the heavies. Mm-hmm. You got Rory Gibbs. You got Morgan Boulding. You've got Pete Chambers while he was still rowing internationally. He was representing Brookes. Joel Castles, my brother Jamie. And then you've got this new bunch coming through of the Mike Glovers, the Sam Nunns, the Harry Brightmore's, who are all representing Brookes as their club as well.
There's clearly this kind of like, there's a formula there that obviously seems to work. There's also kind of like a talent pipeline from the J18 coming through. They've got somewhere to go. How long can Brookes just keep doing this for? You talked about Newcastle's 3 years of dominance, and now you're kind of like, and then that came to an end. But this has been, what, 6 years now?
Mm-hmm.
That you know, Brookes has really been on top. And from what you're saying, there doesn't seem to be a point at which the cycle stops turning.
Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, it was fantastic to be a part of it when it was all starting and kicking off. And, you know, when I won Henley in 2014, that was something I've been, you know, building my whole rowing career towards. Because I lost the final in my last year at school in 2009, which is obviously the Belmont Hill sort of campaign.
We'll have a chat about that. That's a great video.
Yeah. But 2014 was amazing. And then to sort of like take a step back, because I knew that I couldn't, obviously the rules that, you know, if you win the Temple, you can't then try and enter the PA. That's it. Because you can win the PA and you can then compete at the Temple, but you can't go anywhere further than that, as opposed to then shifting to the intermediate events like the visitors or the ladies and so on. So as a Cox, I was just like, okay, 2014, I've won it. I'm going to take a step back. New group of athletes coming through trying to win the Temple. So I was like coxing the Cox Tour behind there. And to see how that all started taking off, like new group coming in and almost winning Henley again straight away. Yeah. And then basically those same 7 or same 6 guys came back the next year and then won it. And then it's like, you know, it's just become almost a certainty every year. I think the only thing that's bucked the trend recently is, was it 2019, I think, when they lost to Washington in the final? No, 2018, because they won it in 2019 with most of the same guys again, and then we haven't had a 2020 regatta. But I couldn't tell you. I mean, as I said, you know, success breeds success, and after just such a, you know, a run that they're on, and they're just continuing to do the same stuff and push the boundaries, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon, if I'm very honest. But yeah, to see, you know, what they've done since 2014 and almost had a flawless run in terms of Henley success with their Temple 8s and their Ladies 8s that they've entered. It's just going to keep attracting more and more people, which then obviously makes the squad better and better and deeper, and the internal competition is that much closer. You know, it's just going to keep attracting people who want to be a part of that program, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon.
My kind of feeling, and I don't know how accurate this is, because again, I'm looking at this from the outside, is that Brookes is very much a feeder pool for GB now. Is that a kind of like, how many people make that leap? Is it just like that if you're in the first 8, you're only going one way, or do people actually kind of say, you know what, this university rowing, this has been great, but I don't really want to make a career out of it? How leaky is the pipeline between?
Well, it's interesting because, like, you know, you have people you got some athletes who, you know, were schoolboys and wanted to go to Brookes because they couldn't or weren't able to, you know, compete at the highest level at Henley when they were a junior, or they didn't have they weren't able to win Henley as a junior, so they want to try and do it at university. And you have some athletes who, like, you know, in either their first or their second year at Brookes, they win Henley and they're like, okay, that's it, that's good for me. And that, you know, that might be the pinnacle of someone's, you know, sporting career, and that's as far as they want to take it. You know, if you look at currently, I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but, you know, they have that performance pathway group that trains with the eye of getting into the senior squad. I want to say there's like 10, 15 of them, possibly.
Okay.
And if you're looking at how the senior squad is at the moment currently, obviously you've got Rory Gibbs, you've got Morgan Boulding, you've got Matt Tarrant, you've got my brother. They're all still in the squad and competing. I think in terms of people who really say, yes, I want to make that leap and go for the national team, there is a very high push through from Brookes in that regard. Because, back in the day, it used to be when you finished being a junior or when you finished at university, you go to a Leander or a Molesey and that's that. And, you used to see at trials just it being Leander and Molesey represented athletes. And now you've got people, retaining their University of London banners and the Newcastle banners. And it's a lot more diverse in terms of the representative clubs. I would say the pipeline's pretty strong in that regard.
To a certain extent, that's that idea of just like how happy people are at Brookes. If they're like, oh, this is good, I'll do some more of this. I mean, that's probably like one of the best indications that you have that you've got a cadre of pretty happy athletes. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I absolutely loved about my time at Oxford-Brookes was the fact that you have this fantastic stretch of river to train on. You have basically a 2K segment that we can do timepieces on. You can get, if you're really going top to tail at the river, you can probably get, I think it's 12K end to end or 10K end to end. Like very easily, you can go from the boathouse down to the bottom lock and back and have done the best part of 16K. And it doesn't feel like you're doing 4 laps of a 2K lake. You can easily cover the mileage and you've got beautiful countryside around you. And as a cox, it's really interesting because of all the bends in the rivers and it requires, a bit of thought and skill to go into how you're steering the boats through. So from a cox's perspective, it's so much nicer to be able to do that than just go up and down a lake. And then you have obviously 2 fantastic boathouses filled with a ridiculous amount of Empacher boats. And
carbon fiber bling.
Yeah. And then you have, they've got phenomenal facilities back at the university in terms of their erg room and the weights gym that they have, and then also a separate S&C facility in the sports performance department. So for an athlete, there is almost every single conceivable thing you might want,
right?
In terms of your experience as an athlete and competing at a high performance center, essentially.
Fair enough. So, one thing you mentioned there was like almost the job and the necessity for coxing. That's kind of what you as like a rowing athlete are famous for is coxing and like these incredible sort of videos that you've got going out. Tell us a bit more about, remember that you're talking to someone whose best rowing has actually happened in small boats. So the rowing I've enjoyed the most and sort of like remember the most is in pairs, doubles and singles. Tell me what it is about coxing, why it matters to the sport, and what great coxes bring to the boat.
So this is something that I've talked to many people about many different times. You can almost, back when I started, coxes were sort of the second citizens of the sport, or second class citizens, because there's that old adage of if the boat wins, it's because the rowers did it. If the boat loses, it's because something the cox did. It was like a lose-lose situation. The way I see it is very much like a jockey. You're controlling the horse, you're controlling the thing that's actually making the boat go, but at the same time you have a lot of control over that, and you can influence them positively or negatively in a really big way. Like a cox, the right cox is like a key to an engine. You've got a V8 and you need the right key to the right engine.
Yeah.
And the best coxes I've found are ones that speak to you subconsciously, because obviously when you're in the middle of a race, you've got 8 athletes, maybe about 750 meters in, they're sort of really pushing the rev limit.
Yeah.
And they're on that red line to the point where the blinkers come in a little bit and they're just solely focused on what they're doing, or they're not totally aware of it. They're just going through that routine, that sort of muscle memory that's bedded in. And, when their eyes are rolling back in their heads, you're the one pulling them back from the brink and still keeping them in control and still getting them operating at 100% or 101% efficiency. And you can only do that if you still have just that little line to them to be able to pull them back from the brink. And that's where this art of like subconscious coxing comes in terms of how you say something is almost always more important than what you say. Okay. And it's how you get people like, you know, just hung on your every word and listening and like just essentially like almost acting before you ask them to, because they're just totally immersed in what you're saying. And, you know, you can have someone who can call a race and, okay, yeah, that was great. You know, you didn't make any mistakes. You know, you went through each of the markers and did the race plan, but did it really get a crew to overperform and like just outperform their expectations? And that's where the whole thing of like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts comes in. Can you really make that unit significantly better than just the individuals? And that's what I find is really, really cool about when you get it right and when you've built up this rapport with the athletes and you know what makes each of them tick and how you can sort of like push that button. So it's like, you know, you play in Mario Kart and you get the golden mushroom and you just keep pressing the button. That's what you're trying to do in coxing the whole time. Yeah. You're just trying to keep the boat just up at that top speed as much as possible.
And get a different response each time you get the call, but making sure you're getting that response.
Yeah. And it's hugely satisfying when you get it right and you see this sort of boat take off and like the timing of everyone reacting to a call at the same time. And it's like, it's really cool when it works. And I think that's what keeps coxes in the sport, because it's that sensation of going ridiculously fast. And also, you know, whether it's a little bit of a power trip or not, depends on the individual, but like just having that ability to control these 8 really powerful athletes in front of you, and have them hanging on your every word and, you know, snap your fingers, tell them to jump and they say how high. And it's really cool.
Okay. Obviously I've kind of looked at like Cox's seats with like absolute fears. Like I just can't fit in there. That's like ridiculous. How can anybody be asked to sit in that seat for an hour? But yeah, I mean, when you talk about it like that, it seems like a huge amount of fun. I mean, almost, I think I've asked this the wrong way around. We've just talked about like the highest level of coxing there. I mean, it's just like, this is the most important thing you do on race day. Take these 8 guys and take them, as you said, to 101% of what they were expecting to do. But at the other end, what do you see as the basic business and the day-to-day responsibilities of being a cox?
Well, so this is something I tell like the junior coxers that I work with. At the absolute base level, is the 3 S's. So steering, or safety, steering, and speech, in that order. Like first and foremost, obviously the boat and the athletes and the equipment and other river users, everything has to be safely looked after. Then you focus on the steering and getting the steering right. And once you've got those 2 things bedded in, then you start thinking about what you're saying. So that's like the absolute, you know, base level of importance. But, you know, in terms of like the day-to-day, you know, once you're in a season and you go in and like you're working with the athletes, like you're a coach in the boat, you can see what's going on. You know, I know from having, you know, seen it from both sides as a cox and as a coach, you don't see certain things unless you're actually sat in the seat, and similarly unless you sat out of the seat. And it's very important for you to be able to help the athletes address that from what you can see. So you're constantly trying to improve each athlete's individual stroke to stroke to stroke to stroke, so that they're both making progress and also making your boat better. And you're, you know, facilitating the smooth running of the session and the smooth execution of, you know, the training and what that session entails. You're trying to get the most out of the athletes, but you're also trying to tick the box on what we need to do today, and also at the same time improve yourself. It's very much underrated in terms of like, you know, how a cox can just make a session happen. A really good cox can just make a session happen without the athletes needing to worry about, Are we in the wrong place on the river? Are we definitely going to get the 12K in that we need to? Are we going to get these bursts in before we get to the start line of the piece? Blah, blah, blah. The value behind a really good Cox is just allowing the athletes to relax and do the training. And all of that, potential stress and responsibility sits with the Cox, and the athletes can trust that the Cox is, just going to get everything done. Yeah, there is a lot to think about all at the same time. And I think it's one of the things that sometimes the athletes don't necessarily recognize is how much is going on and being monitored and how many plates are constantly spinning. When it's like, oh yeah, I could do your job, it's easy. It's like, okay, sit down, have a crack, make this session happen, go on. And then, this has happened to me a couple of times in my career, actually, where I've turned the tables on an athlete and said, oh, all right, crack on, let's see what you can do. And, they're flabbergasted by how much there is to actually do and how much there is to manage, and also to manage well, and how easy it is to think you've got something under control and for then it to completely turn on you and be a complete mess.
Yeah. So is that something that you think that should be encouraged more, is switching people around, getting the Cox into the boat and getting possibly the athletes, even if they're sort of like hanging with their, balancing their feet on strokes riggers, into the Cox's seat, so there's a little bit more empathy and realization of what has to happen?
I think it couldn't hurt. I wouldn't say obviously making a big thing of it, a regular thing of it, but for a certain athlete, or whether it's as a coach, if you're sort of managing the individuals in a squad and two of them aren't getting along, and one of it being a Cox and a rower, and just to sort of get each of them to understand each other's position a bit more and have a little bit more, empathy for what they do and what they bring. It couldn't hurt, but yeah, in terms of just sort of essentially taking a whole session or even a part of the session to sort of make a point does take some time.
How do you start? How do you take someone who you're either suggesting to or has come along and said, I'd like to try this boat piloting business? How do you take them and turn them into a Cox? I mean, I'm aware that there's no kind of training manual for Coxes, as far as I know. So what are the stages you take them through?
Well, yeah. So there still isn't at the moment, and that's kind of what I'm trying to change, certainly within Abingdon School. When I was at school, obviously there was a coach for the athletes. There isn't really a coach for the Coxes. You kind of just have to pick these things up as you go. And this was at the time before, there was a lot of content on YouTube and stuff like that. So I was looking for, audio clips on websites and things of Coxes, and listening to Ace, another Cox in Oxford in the boat race and stuff like this, and thinking, I like the way he makes that call. Why has he made that call? Oh, how can I sort of fit that into my own vocabulary? And just tried things out and just, developed a style and a way that I liked to Cox, and that I liked how it sounded. And actually, it wasn't just fluff. It was, effective speech, and everything that I said had a purpose. There was no filler. And the Coxes sort of in the years below me, sort of they'd pick up what I was doing, and they'd then take it and make it their own version when they were in the upper sixth at school. And there was a really good sort of continuation of Coxing at Abingdon. But from the J14 level, what I try and do is, I obviously you start with kids who are relatively small, but they, I've had quite a few kids grow out of Coxing because, while they might be
small at 13,
5'2", 5'4" at 13, 14, they might end up being 6'5" by the time they're 18. There's a guy like that, actually, Tim Clark, who was a schoolboy with me. He raced in the first state with me in 2009. He raced at Newcastle University, and then he was on the national team for a number of years. He was a Cox, when he was 15 years old, because he was 5'7" and he could fit into the seat. So he coxed when he was a J15, and then he started growing. And J16, he was the bowman of the J16Bs.
Yeah.
And then he was in the second 8 in his lower sixth, and then he was in the first 8 in his upper sixth. And then he went to Newcastle and went to, under 23s and World University Championships. So how small someone necessarily is when they're 14 might not be when they're 18, but it's good to find kids who've already very, sure of themselves. Like, they got no problem speaking out. They've got no problem, I guess, being a bit loud, really. That's always a good thing to have for a junior cox. And then it's essentially just teaching the basics. And you say, okay, we say this because X, we say this because Y. This is how you tell them to get the boat out. And if necessary, you do it yourself, and they do it sort of in a parrot fashion. They listen and they hear and they repeat themselves. And there was this cox that I started in the lower sixth year. He wanted to take it up, and he'd obviously never done anything like this before. So I said, okay, this is how you steer. Focus on that and just try and absorb what I'm saying to the athletes each session, to the point where he was then like, okay, I think I can start running this now. Gave him the reins, and he was basically telling the athletes what to do. And, there were a couple hiccups at the beginning because you might get a call wrong or not say it right. But then he quickly learned, that's not how you do it. This is how you do it. And then his coxing really sort of took off from there. So it's very much the same as coaching a rower, but surprisingly, a lot of people don't do it.
Fair enough. I mean, sort of looking at that kind of school thing, obviously Abingdon is regarded as one of the big rowing schools. I mean, are you do you adapt every year to the kids that you're teaching, or do you have an overarching philosophy of where Abingdon rowing is going and what it is?
Yeah, we do have a philosophy in that sense, in terms of the reputation of the boat club really sort of came along in sort of that 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 year, where, we had a couple losses in either the semis or the finals. Then they had the 3 years that they won back to back to back, which was really, really cool for the school. And, that really sort of raised the profile of rowing as a sport within the school, and obviously drew a lot of interest from the younger years and the students. And schoolboy rowing right now is crazy competitive. Competitive. There was, back when I was at school, I think there's been two standout crews that have really upped the game over the last 10 years. So when I was at school, for a first 8 to break 6 minutes in fast conditions was amazing. For a J16 8 to get 6:10 was amazing. That was incredible. Yeah. That was the standard. And in 2009, that was the first year of the Stan Leludis era.
Leludis and Nash.
Yeah, there was a video taken by one of the parents of my crew from the big bus that drives alongside Nottingham. And it looks like any regular Champ 8 final, there's 3 or 4 crews vying for the lead, and there's a couple sort of hanging onto the coattails. And then the camera pans left. There's this Eton crew a good 100, 150 meters ahead, and they're just in another league.
Yeah.
And we ended up getting a silver medal. In any other year, that would have been a Champ 8 gold. But this crew went from being okay, 5:55 is the standard, to 5:45 is the standard.
Yeah.
And that was the level that everyone started trying to push their programs on towards. And then in my opinion, the St. Paul's crew in 2018 were the next generation of that. They pushed it on even more in terms of the training and the efficiency and the style and the rowing. And you've got a junior boys 8 all from the same school. They're not the best athletes in the country brought together for a junior world's 8 or something. They were their own school 8, and they went 5:36 at Marlow Regatta. And once again, boof, another standard, and that's what everyone's trying to get up towards. And like, you know, much the same as I was saying about Oxford-Brookes in terms of like that's the amount of training that's required to maintain that standard of racing. With schoolboys, it's a very careful balance because, you know, at the same time they are trying to get their academics. They're trying to get, sorry, not just schoolboys, but juniors in general. You know, they're all trying to get through their A levels and go off to university. So the academics are like the top priority. That's why they're at school. They're there to get their academics. And for many, you're like the rowing is a passion as much as it is a sport and a sporting option, but it's also how they choose to spend their time and how they want to spend their time. But you can't push that too far to the point where you're training them like, you know, full-time athletes.
Internationals,
because at the end of the day, you know, they are kids. They only have a limited amount of time because they're still sort of balancing this academic sporting lifestyle. And obviously, if you do too much training, you take them too far in one direction, you start getting injuries and you start getting people dropping out because they can't commit the time or whatever. So, yeah, it's a careful balance. And one of the things we say at Abingdon, like at the end of the day, if a kid wants to do it, we will give him as much of our time and attention as possible. And we're not going to keep a kid rowing at Abingdon if he doesn't want to, if he wants to go off and do another sport, or if he, you know, if he ends up being phenomenal as a cross-country runner. It's like, okay, great, go do that. That's fantastic. Because our philosophy, I guess, if you put it this way, is we want what's best for the kid. And if the kid is really enjoying and thriving in his rowing, that's fantastic. If the kid wants to put more of his time into his rugby or his cricket in the summer, that's also cool. I think we're one of the only schools that doesn't offer 3-term rowing for like the lower years. We only pick up rowing in January for the J14s through to the J16s. So for the younger years, it can be seen as like a 1-term or 2-term sport. Yeah. And so they tend to do other sports in and around that too. But when it comes up to their sort of J17, J18 years, we can offer 3 terms, and that's when we see the people who really want to pick rowing as their sport option.
Okay. So you almost see that the way of keeping your best athletes in rowing is letting them wander. It's giving them the freedom to to kind of try other things, and if that's where they want to be, that's what's best for them, basically. And that's probably what's best almost for the boat, because then you've got the people who are in it, the people who want to be there.
Yeah, I think like I and the other coaches will always get the most out of a kid if they really are passionate about it and really want to be there. If you've got someone who doesn't really want to be there but is really good, you're never quite going to see their 100%, I don't think. Okay. So I'd rather work with the kids who really want to be there and might not necessarily be as good as someone else who chooses to do another sport. I'd rather work with the kids who want to be there, because I'm like, okay, you're really going to be committed to what I want to get out of you, and I'll give you as much of, you know, my best coaching as I can. So
when you have these crews who get these incredible runs of success, is this just something that a decent coach with a decent bunch of athletes can put together? Is it down to there, or do you actually have to say, as a school rowing club, we are going to be preparing and ready for having those great athletes turning up? So how much do you have to have on standby to have those great runs of success?
I mean, having all of the facilities and equipment and the best kids at your disposal always does help. But, you know, you can do a lot with, you know, very humble facilities, equipment. There's a lot of schools in the past who, you know, they've just had a really good overarching drive and mentality within the squad of athletes and the coach get so much out of themselves. Like, you know, there are some schools where rowing is the premier sport. It is, you know, the reason why some parents send their kids to that particular school, because they want them to be involved in rowing. You've got some schools where the school has a good history of rowing, but it's not the top sport. It sits amongst the cricket and the athletics and so on and so forth. The thing I love about rowing is there's no two ways to skin a cat. Okay. There's so many different ways of doing the training and still getting the same end result. Like, you can pick one of 5-6 different paths of training programs and things, and like, you'll still end up with that crew is, you know,
is awesome.
Is still awesome. So, and that's what I love, because like, you might have schools where it's like, we've only got a 1 kilometer stretch of river, but we'll do with it as much as we can. And we've got to tweak the training in different ways to make sure we still get the same end result. You know, you've got crews that row on the tideway and have the ability to go out and do 16, 20K sessions. So they might do less weights and less ergs or things like that. So a lot of schools have the ability to go very quickly. And, you know, that shows by how, you know, at school's head, you've got top 10 crews might be separated by like 6 seconds, something like that. And, you know, you get Champ 8 semi-finals where, you know, the difference between coming second and coming 7th in a semi-final is like half a length and stuff like that. There are so many different clubs and schools that, you know, are still able to churn out really, really quick boats. And, you know, well, yes, it might be really helpful to have a long stretch of river to get a lot of mileage on, or a fantastically kitted out, you know, weights gym, or 30 ergos, or empacker boats, or whatever. Like, yeah, and, you know, like the best kids. But you can still get a lot out of our sport with just people who are very committed and have the right attitude and the right drive.
To a certain extent, that's absolutely the right answer. That's kind of like, oh yeah, that's what we want to hear. It's just like, we can actually do it. You can, if you're just this kind of like slightly provincial school or junior club, you can still beat the Eatons. And being someone who's been, as an adult rower, and has only ever been an adult rower, having been beaten by kind of 17-year-old schoolboys on a regular basis, it's quite nice to hear that actually it is just a question. Find your niche, do the training, and, you know, if you have the talent and you have the dedication, you can make the boat go fast. That's a very nice message. It's been absolutely brilliant talking to you, and it's been a fantastic interview so far. But I really did want to sort of finish off with a couple of things, and the first one is the video. That, you know, Terence Chipchase reminded me that you'd started the Abingdon versus Belmont Hill, and it's got 140,000 views on YouTube, which is fairly remarkable for a rowing video. You know, that's up there with like kind of some of the views of the Olympic races. But it's such a dramatic race. Is there kind of like, has the fact that it was videoed, it's such a dramatic soundtrack to a race, has that led to any sort of like ill feeling from Belmont Hill?
I hope not.
Is there like a Rory Copus shaped dartboard somewhere in the coach's office at Belmont Hill? I don't know, but like, one of the things I'd love, and like, obviously if like you know, some of the members of stewards are listening to this, I mean, it'd be grand to be able to do like an Abingdon versus Belmont, like row past sort of thing. That'd be great. Because we went, oh God, it was last year, was the 15-year anniversary, which is crazy to think. But yeah, I don't know. It was everything came together in a really, really good way, in the perfect way, I guess. And I think what makes it a really cool video to watch is obviously
you have this sort of narrative of like they start massively down and they come back through, and I sound pretty effusive and passionate.
Yes, definitely.
while this is all
definitely.
happening.
Some fairly remarkable calls in there, and it's like, again, Terence pointed it out to me, so watch it again. Watch when he says, "I'm coming for you, Belf. I'm coming for you," and you're actually pointing at their stroke man. Yeah. And that was just like, blimey, that's cheeky. And you could understand that actually genuinely distracting and unsettling like a few members in the crew. It's just like, why is he pointing at us? What are we doing? And it's just like, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a brilliant little track to watch.
I was thinking at sort of that point in the race, I was like, what went through my mind was, something needs to happen. I need to do something right now. I need to like make an impact. And I don't know, it just like, most of the best races that I've ever coxed or been part of, like, yes, there's an overarching like plan or race plan, but a lot of it is just off of just you're coxing from instinct. Like very rarely have I done a race where I've been like totally clinical and everything is pre-prepared, because 9 times out of 10 races don't go the way that you're expecting. And with Belmont Hill especially, I knew they were going to go, because we talked about it the night before. They raced at Stotesbury on the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia, Stotesbury Cup, which is a 1,500 meter race, and that's like the East Coast Schoolboy Championships, I think. So they're used to racing 1500s. They're not used to racing 2K, and they're certainly not used to racing 2,112 meters. So we knew that they were going to be going out, like a rocket to begin with. So we just have to stick with them and weather it, and we come through. Because we know that from all the training we've been doing, we had a really good retention of speed into the second half of the race. And within the first 20, 30 strokes, it was a very different race than I had sort of like worst case scenario planned for. So I was like, right, we're down. This is not where we planned to be, and by this much. So I think when we got to the barrier, obviously that's like a minute 40 something in, I called for a sting, which was like a quick, like 8-10 stroke speed boost, basically. Because this was back at the point where, you did pushes in schoolboy racing. And there had been a lot of rain that week, and there was still some flow on the river. So obviously the way the river works, you're out of the stream if you're on the Berkshire side of things, opposite the town side, up until the barrier. Then you're out of the stream because the course obviously shifts into the middle of the river. You're out of the stream on the Buck side, so you've got the advantage from the barrier through to about Remenham, and then it kind of evens out. But then the last 200 meters, the Berkshire station has an advantage because it's really tucked inside the bank. Yeah. And so I did a sting right after the barrier to try and just reel back in a little bit of speed and reel back a little bit of that distance to Belmont, just as the advantage shifted to our station. And it helped. It sort of stunted them moving away any further. And it was just about keeping my guys trusting that we had a chance and believing that we still could come through. And it started happening as we get to Upper Thames. We started getting contact back again, bow to stern. That's when I thought, okay, I need to do something here. And that happened. Yeah. the arm pointing. And I was like, oh, I just did that. Whoops. Because I've always had a lot of pride in being a respectful competitor. Okay. And you sometimes have these coxes that are quite bolshy, getting involved with other crews, as opposed to just being trying to be a gentleman, a gentleman of the sport. And you do your race, 3 cheers, hip hip hooray, whatever. But you're always giving your opponents the respect they deserve when you start the race, when you finish the race, blah, blah, blah. And it sort of came off the back of this, because I look back and I'm like, oh, that's a bit cheeky. I probably should have done that, but okay. And that was just when the tide started turning. We started coming through. We came level by the Humpback Bridge. And as we come into our sort of sprint sequence, that's when it really happened. It was like, okay, we took a seat, we took 2 seats, and that's it, and it's gone. And that was when they blew up with about 200 meters to go. So it was crazy. It was a crazy race, and heart rate as a cox is as high as the athletes. Because when I was racing for Leander in the ladies' plate in 2019, there was a student from Oxford-Brookes who was doing her dissertation on heart rates of coxes and can it be, and like, do coxes reach their max heart rate while coxing in the middle of a race? Does it depend on the external factors, so on and so forth? And so I was wearing a heart rate for the semi-final against the Dutch crew, the Dutch under-23s, and my heart rate got up to 198 beats per minute. Sat there for from about a third of the way into the race, and then stayed there for the remainder of it. So, you know, obviously you're not actively exerting yourself up to that heart rate as a cox, but it's just from you are riding this wave of adrenaline in massive races, and you just have this massive, just like, massive bonk as soon as you finish a race, because you've just been on this adrenaline high for 4 or 5 minutes. And Belmont was just a crazy race, absolute crazy race. And, you know, my guys were written off. They were completely ruined for the rest of that day. And we went home to the house that we were staying at for Henley, and we had like this inflatable, paddling pool, and everyone just went and sat in there and just chilled out for ages. And then we had not as difficult a race on the Saturday against Brunswick School from the States, which was quite good, because if we'd had another like competitor like Belmont Hill, then we might not have made it to the final that year.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just, everything came together and everything was timed perfectly, to the point where I thought, okay, I may as well put my soundtrack, onto the video and stick it on YouTube. And I guess people can like learn from it or something. And it's blown up into this thing that's got quite a few views on YouTube. I think, hang on, I'm just going to check it now myself, because I haven't done this for a while. Because there's obviously Belmont Hill, and then there's my recording from 2014.
You've got a Brookes one there that's like got another 9,000 views on it. I haven't actually listened to that one.
So in total, there's 300,000 views between the two of them, which is mental.
It's putting Cameron Buchan into his place as a rowing YouTuber. It's pretty good going, really. Okay, so it's been brilliant. I just want to finish with the question that I ask everybody, or I should say we ask everybody, which is, from your point of view, rowing in the UK, what is it doing right at the moment? What is it doing wrong? And what do you think we should be doing to make things a bit better?
Really, really good question. Because obviously I've listened to every single one of your episodes on this podcast, and it's very interesting to hear how people answer this question at the end of each episode. I think accessibility for as many people as possible to do the sport. I know sometimes rowing gets this sort of reputation of being like a very private school thing, and you can only do it if you have money or stuff like that. Like, if you want to go to the local rowing club and get out in a boat, that's fine. Like, that's exactly what it's there for. You don't have to pick up rowing at school. There's the ability to go and do the sport in so many different places. And I think that's one of the things that rowing is doing better at, is like, if you see that sport on the TV at the Olympics or something, you're like, oh, I want to go and try that and pick it up. There is the ability to go do that, which I think is fantastic. And I think parity is doing a really good job at the moment, or rowing is doing a really good job of parity. You look at Henley Royal Regatta. It was a humongous shame that we weren't able to race it this year with everything that's going on right now. But, there's the new events for women's student eights, junior women's eights. There is almost exactly the same number of female athletes as male athletes competing in the regatta now, which is brilliant. That's exactly as it should be. As of yesterday, September 12th, an email came out from the National Schools Regatta Committee with rule changes that are going to be enacted for the 2021 regatta. And once again, the goal of these changes is to provide parity across men's and women's events, so the equal number of athletes competing from both, and also to increase inclusivity, basically, so that, I've always loved the ability of racing the eights on the Saturday and then breaking your eight down into a Copus and a Copus 4 for the Sunday racing. Yeah. But that does then push out smaller clubs who might only have a Copus 4, and that's what they're aiming for, and then don't have a chance for a medal. So they've brought in this new rule that stops doubling up. Okay. So you can only enter one championship event. You can't enter Champ 8s and Champ Copus 4s, which means that other smaller clubs might have the ability to get a medal instead, which I think is fantastic. And you can't enter an A boat into a B boat event because you think, they're not going to be as competitive in that event, so we're going to race B boats instead and stuff like that. So it's keeping everybody operating at the same level and having the same ability to come home with a medal or race at a high level at the regatta, which I think is really, really good.
Rory, thank you very much. The last thing I think I'm going to say is please do check out Rory's YouTube channel, Rory Copus, or is it Coach Copus?
It's Coach Copus, yeah.
Coach Copus, that's it. Coach Copus on YouTube. There are some great videos. I think you've kind of got like a few sort of meme videos up there. So there's
there's a couple there. Yeah,
winning by inches, which is always great. And thank you very much. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Cool.
Right, that was an absolutely great chat, I think, Aaron. I'm genuinely honoured to have had that chat with Rory. I don't think he sort of necessarily raised the points, but the whole way through, it left me very much with a feeling that he was almost an antidote to a lot of the stuff that we talked about with Tristan. Because Tristan is very much, he was discussing what happens when high-performance programs go too far, when high-performance programs alienate athletes and mistreat athletes. Rory, both at Abingdon and at Oxford-Brookes, he seemed like he was a graduate of, high-performance programs, rowing clubs that were there to win, but they've done it the right way. And as a result, they've been enormously successful. They've done really well. They've won loads of races. But at the same time, they've engendered huge loyalty in their alumni and have really kind of shown that it doesn't have to be this almost terminal sacrifice of all the good things in your life. It can be, being part of a high-performance rowing program can be a good thing in itself. And I thought that was a really, really interesting and important counterpoint to a lot of the things we've been talking about, that we talked about with Tristan, all very valid points, and we've been talking about recently on Twitter.
I would agree with that. I think I was very lucky in as much as because I didn't get to sit in on the interview, I actually got to listen to it. So I first of all, when I was editing it, I was enjoying it as an interview, and I think that he makes some fantastic points. I think what's interesting is he's very, very honest about the level that's now required at Oxford-Brookes. So he's being very upfront about the program has been so successful that it's probably going to fit an athlete of a certain profile. But in talking about his work with Abingdon, he's also something that Pete Brewer, when he came on, about the importance of fun in rowing for the holistic growth of that individual. That's more important than the boat. So there's a really interesting balance going on there between, he's very realistic about the demands of high performance programs, but he's also very aware that rowing, if you want to keep people in the sport, has to be fun. I think it's the first time anyone's really broken down what a cox does and how they do it and how they learn it, the demands of being a cox. Because every rower tends to think when the cox is picking on them, God, you just sit there, you don't do anything. There are so many things they are constantly juggling. And Rory's very, very precise about all of those elements having to work, about how you might learn them as a cox, what might, safety first and then steering and then speech. And he made me think back to the coxers that Lewin and I were lucky enough to row with, who were, as Rory was to his crews, integral parts of our boat. And Rory was spot on about a good cox can make a good crew great. And coxing, I think, brings us back to how we both kind of found out about Rory, which is Belmont, Lewin, which is a masterclass in a lot of things about coxing, from the etiquette of it to how you deliver it when you need it.
I would say that the Abingdon versus Belmont video, it's a masterclass. It is this demonstration of how you can take a crew that knows where 100% is and is suddenly finding that 100% is not enough in a race, and that guy steering the boat, that guy who is trained with them and knows everything that can make them push a bit harder, can actually give them 101%. That's the zenith of what the cox's role is for. I would also say that there are some notable points in this, and one is the arm out of the boat towards the Belmont boat. Belmont, I'm coming for you. I'm effing coming for you. And we discussed that. And this is probably like one of the most famous coxing lines in the country, because it's been seen 145,000 times on YouTube, and people remember that. You can talk about that with other rowers, and it's one of the reasons why Rory is kind of a known person. Immediately the thing he says about it is like, it wasn't planned, and I actually really felt that I went a bit too far. And in that minute, you realise that this is not just a guy who's all about the competition. He's a guy who is highly competitive, highly driven, but he loves his sport. He loves the concept of fair play. And the fact that he's willing to almost kind of row back on, no pun intended, this kind of incredibly famous moment in his career is a real testament to the individual.
I think that's a sign of the man, and I think it's a beautiful encapsulation of the things that we've just talked about. You were basically saying about the Belmont Abingdon race. It's almost like a process of alchemy where you have these athletes, and we're all rowers here, and everyone listening to it is a rower. All of our scores are logged. All of our tests are logged. Every outing that we do is logged. Every weight that we lift is logged. We know what the limits of our performance are. But on that day, in that moment, when they had this crew that they knew were going to be fast, they were a 1,500 meter crew, they were going to get out. On that moment, there was an alchemy that happened where the performance of Rory in that boat elevated the performance of the 8 in the boat. And in the same way that he brought the best out of his athletes and he elevated them, his sense of responsibility towards the athletes in his charge, which inspired him to produce that moment that kept them in the race, that they then went on to win. It was just that beautiful thing of he lifted them and they lifted him, and you have this iconic performance. And frankly, if you're ever going to go and lift weights, go for a run, take the dog for a walk, sit on an erg, take the bike out, go for a swim, listen to this before you do it, because you'll have a great session afterwards. It's iconic piece.
Yeah, I think that's about it.
I think we've been yet again we've been very lucky in our guests. It was a fantastic piece to listen to.
We have. I'm gonna say that stroke side should be holding and bow side should be getting out.
Okay, well that's just typical of you stroke siders, isn't it?
Absolutely. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening.
Good night.